All right, we are live. We're back with the Positive Effect weekly broadcast, and I'm so excited today to have Maral. I'm going to get your last name right, Kasamjian. Did I say it right? Okay, awesome.
Perfect. Hi, April. Hi, everybody.
Hi, how are you? It's so good to have you on our weekly broadcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, so excited to reconnect with you and to discuss. I know we have so many interesting things to share, so very excited.
Yeah. So before we jump into it, I'm just going to set us up. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Put your name in the chat where you're coming from, because we have an amazing international retail, network now that's kind of following this every week. And also, if you're coming back, thank you very much for joining us again. And this is going to be turned into a podcast on Apple Podcasts now as well afterwards, so you'll be able to follow along if you miss this broadcast. My name's April Sobral. I'm the founder of Retail U and the author of a book called The Positive Effect. Hi, Ron. I see you just jumping on. Nice to see you. And, every week we jump on here and have a conversation about really retail leadership and all things that, I absolutely love about this industry. And I have an amazing network of people that I've worked with or new leaders that I've just met in the last year. And so, these are great conversations. So I'm going to ask you that if you find this, please share it in your feed with as many people as you can, because they're mentorship conversations with amazing leaders like Maral that you just wouldn't normally hear. So I'm just going to ask you to keep sharing it. So with that, Maral, it's all about you today and asking you a ton of questions because I met you when we were working at DAVIDsTEA. We worked extremely closely. And so we're going to get into that and HR and operations and how do we make that better? Because, we did a good job of it, I think. But before we get into that, I always love to ask people how did you choose your career? How did you fall into it? And then how did you choose the retail lane, right, as part of your career? Because it's a really interesting conversation, because retail is such a big industry, but it's always seen as not necessarily an industry that people choose. I'd love to hear, have you share that.
Absolutely. So I love retail. I've been in and out of retail, a couple of times because I really believe in going and getting the experiences that you need at that stage in your life so that you can keep completing your experience and keep growing. I got into retail a little bit by fluke, I have to say, but I'm so grateful and so thankful that I did, because it's been the best school for me. So I was very involved at university as a student. And so there was this networking cocktail with a bunch of employers who were going to show up and who needed students. And I fell on this wonderful leader at the booth that Home Depot Canada had. And we connected and she said, let's talk. I interviewed, I got hired as her assistant. And then my passion for HR and retail really solidified with my experience there. And I grew with the organization, and they opened doors for me. I worked very hard, but it was a wonderful learning experience. And the beauty about retail is that you're in the heart of the action, right? Everything you do impacts the bottom line, everything. Who you hire, how you treat them, their engagement, health and safety, the training and knowledge that you give them, because you give them that ability to go and sell on the floor. So the beauty of retail is that your impact is immediate and it's on the bottom line, which is not something that you find in many industries. And it's just a world of opportunities. So I'm all for starting in retail, continuing in retail, growing in retail, and doing whatever you need to do to just keep, expanding your knowledge and your experience.
So then you started with Home Depot and you went into HR, right? You started and then you grew into different roles.
Yes.
And then I met you at DAVIDsTEA, where you were hired to lead all of DAVIDsTEA. We were working really, really closely together. Like you were leading the HR business partners, I think, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So I was leading the field HR team,
Right.
and I was just getting out of the aerospace industry. So after Home Depot, I went into manufacturing and aerospace as an HR business partner there. And there I was exposed to change management, global mobility, organizational development, restructuring, and all these kinds of things that I was able to bring into my role at DAVIDsTEA, because there it was all about structuring and, putting formal processes in place, problem solving, creating those partnerships, and a lot of change management, because we both went through putting a lot of new things in place as the company was expanding. I think the company was about 7 years old when we joined. And so we were getting ready for IPO, new stores, we were shifting to a sales culture, we were implementing leadership programs, and so our partnership was super important to make sure that we were aligned and to make sure that we could succeed as a team and as an organization.
So before we jump into a very important conversation tactically about how HR and operations work better together, because there's always like this push and pull between these two departments, even though they work so close together. And our experience is in Canada, so it could be a little bit different in the US, but pretty much it's, you work for international companies, I've worked for international companies, so it all comes back to relationships. But like, I want you to share like any pivotal moments or any like successes or things that you learned throughout your career that people could like learn from you, that could take away and be like, oh, that's a really good lesson learned. I could think about that and apply that. Because I think through like what you just shared, your career growth in retail and in HR, working with operations teams, it's like you must have had some real, well, maybe not in retail, maybe in your other industries, but you've had some real pivotal moments and probably some things in your career where you've like, yeah, I did that, I learned that, or like it was a big lesson learned. So can you share any of those? Can you think of any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to think of your career as you're responsible for it, right? So every position I've taken has benefited me and has benefited the organization. So I think you need to be very aligned with what your mandates are in every organization. And so that's what I did. I just made sure that every mandate I took on was as developmental for me as it was useful for the organization.
So can you think of an example of that though? What do you mean when you say that?
So when I joined DAVIDsTEA, it was a beautiful opportunity for me to come in and take all the experiences that I've had in the past years and be able to implement something from scratch, whereas all the other organizations I had worked for already had established HR departments, established practices, which was beautiful because I learned from them. And then I was able to really make something of my own with DAVIDsTEA, with something that really respected the DAVIDsTEA culture and the way of doing things.
So what leaders have you worked for in your career that, or maybe you don't want to name them, but like a piece of advice? I love always asking leaders this question, like a piece of advice that somebody gave you that was really pivotal to you, that you hold on to, and that has kind of shaped your leadership style.
Yeah, so many, so many. I've got two that come to mind. One of them is, it was sent to me in French. I'm going to translate it roughly in English, but it was a wonderful VP of HR at Bombardier Aerospace. And she said, go slow, you're going to end up going faster at the end. And so what that means is, take your time, reflect, analyze, assess, get the facts, properly understand a situation before you jump into conclusions, especially if the impact is going to be substantial. Right. And so I always keep that in mind. And of course, that doesn't mean you should take, 5 days to get back to somebody or whatever. But I think, remain timely in your solutions. But it's super important to be able to take well thought out decisions, especially in retail, where it's extremely fast paced and you're thinking on your feet and you have to implement solutions quickly. But how quick is too quick, right?
And operations teams are always like, I want the answer yesterday from the HR team.
Yes. And I think it's important to kind of, set expectations clearly, agree on what's realistic and what's, and what makes most sense, but to properly assess. And again, that you're still going fast, but not too fast. Take your decisions with facts and to be able to, because the problem is when you launch something, when you put a change somewhere, it's a ripple effect. So
Right.
if you didn't take the right decision, you've just disrupted the workflow of thousands of employees. And so, what's the point of going so fast that you're disrupting the workflow of thousands of employees if you're going to cause another shift again? And in my last year, I've specialized and got certified in change management, which, with ProSci, which is key. And I've had to manage change all throughout my career. But with ProSci, it's really clear, and the methodology is very clear in terms of the consequences of poorly managed change, are huge. We're talking costs, we're talking employee engagement, we're talking, there are ripple effects. And I think you need to make sure that, what you're putting in place makes sense and is well thought out. So that's definitely one that I retain that is applicable in multiple facets.
Oh, yeah. Okay. What's the second one?
The second one was really putting things in perspective. I think this was said to me very, very early on in my career. I was 19 when I started in HR, and I was store-based, right? And it's one of those things where leaders just knock on your door and want an answer, and I'm just going, whoa, like I need to think about this. And so, things aren't dramatic. There's always a solution. There's always a way to communicate whatever needs to be said. You choose the right words, the right tone, the right setting, the time, and everything.
Yeah.
And I think when you take a huge step back and you put things in perspective, then everything seems de-dramatized, simple. And if you've worked for me, you know that I've said this on repeat, put things in perspective. If you've worked with me, I've said it too.
Yeah.
It's really about just taking a step back, calming down, and just moving forward. And it's very feasible.
I've heard you say that on many occasions. Let me tell you, it's very helpful because with sales and operations leaders, especially field, I mean, that's where I come from. It's like, we're managed to a sales number every day. So this reactionary feeling of like driving results or having to deliver results is a very in the moment thing, because every customer interaction can change your day in a positive way or negative way, which has a ripple effect further down the line if they had a good experience or a bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
But in that moment, we're trying to drive results. So a lot of sales and operations leaders, you're looking for a results driver, which is in complete contradiction with what you just shared.
You've got to balance it out, right? I think it's you can make any change happen as long as you create the awareness and the why, and people understand and create that engagement, which you are very good at, April, at communicating, and that's why I think we worked well together, because we were very aligned on communicating properly and launching things properly from the get-go to make sure that it ran smoothly,
Yeah, well, that's because you would slow me down a bit, though, too. So that's where that partnership comes in, because I'm a little bit faster than people, and I know that sometimes I can be too fast. And so that's where I would really rely on, leaders like yourself in those partnerships to really be that thinking brain. Like I always saw like my HR, like you specifically, as like my counsel. It's like, I have this idea, I want to do this, we want to launch this, or we're thinking about solving this problem. But like, and then my immediate thought goes, okay, who's my counsel around me? Who's my, my board, my team, my board members, that I can go to if I was sitting around a board table. And you would always be that person that I would go to and have that counsel, like to actually have the discussion with, which I always really appreciated. And I think that is a big opportunity that I see in terms of HR and operations working together. So what is the role of a HR, in retail, in your perspective, working, let's say operations in the field, because there's corporate and there's two different ways of looking at it. And specifically like now, I mean, I know that you're a big advocate for change and changing HR, how it's been viewed and where it's going. So what is the role of HR, do you feel?
You know, so that answer can go on for so long, but very briefly, I think it's about, you know, being in the moment, and both being in the moment, but also being able to project sort of where the impact of the decisions of operations of where the company is going. I think it's all about being an advocate and being the voice of the employee, and sort of bringing another perspective, which is detached a little bit from operations, which sort of highlights the reality of the employees or the consequence of the decision on the employees, to bring that perspective, you know. And I think, of course, we have multiple hats that we're wearing. There's the HR operational excellence, where you really have to make sure all the administrative stuff gets done, you know, whatever is operationally required for the employee to be hired and succeed in the organization. Then there's the talent management portion, where we're supporting, you know, regional managers or whoever, all leaders in the field, to make sure their employees are growing and getting the training that they need, and that what we're doing is still relevant. So just assessing competitiveness there too. There's the strategy portion, which is, we're not just talking about today, but especially when an organization is growing, what are we putting in place to make sure that we're still relevant from a talent perspective, from an employee, you know, branding perspective too, of what we're offering the employees. How do we make sure it's competitive and it will make sense down the line? But also, you know, looking at asking a lot of questions, being very present, which is, I think, one of the reasons why our partnerships worked very well. I think we're very present, and I think that, you know, if there are any HR, you know, leaders listening in, I think for me it was very important to not wait to be invited to meetings, but to show up, you know. Yeah, and you know, and it wasn't one of those, I'll just wait for them to call me, because if they don't know what you can bring to the table, why will they call you, you know? Right. So I think it's really important to sort of make sure that you're welcomed in the space, but to be welcomed in the space, you have to gain your credibility by listening, asking questions, understanding what it is that field leaders are prioritizing and what they need, so that your HR strategy for the next 3 years is aligned and makes sense, and you aren't missing some key pieces to where the company is trying to go. So
tactically, like if you're watching this and you're thinking, you know, I'd love a better relation, you're in HR and you're like, how do I build this bridge? Because there's a lot of silos that happens, unfortunately. One of the tactical things we did together is when I had my regional directors together, because we did quarterly planning sessions, right, where we were, because we were in growth mode. So, you know, I was like, it's great to have a 5-year plan, but really 5-year plans right now just don't exist. They're out of the window, because look at what happened last year. But we were meeting on a quarterly basis, and we would always have you in that regional kind of quarterly meeting where we were planning out things. And then if we had our strategic plan, we were like, okay, this was our year plan, but, you know, we're reviewing the quarter. We would say, okay, you know, Maral, your team, like, how does this mesh with what the company's objectives are or what you want to achieve? And then, like, is this tactically realistic? How does that help guide the decisions or the spend that we want to do? And you were in those meetings along with training. So I always had HR, training, operations together in those quarterly meetings, because I just felt like, if we're not on the same page, then how do you coach your business partners to support us, right?
100%. And I think that's one of the key things that we did really well together, you know, is that to always, you know, be aligned, you be in each other's meetings. You know, we had our weekly touch points. We were aligned on our priorities. We toured the country together. Like we went on, you know, store visits together. And I think, you know, it's about making the effort to understand, right? Like I'd like to think that I made an effort to go into stores and to understand operationally what was happening, what our customers wanted. I read customer surveys because I wanted to understand what they were saying about our employee services, so that we could hire better, so that we could train better. So I think it's all about putting in the effort to get more understanding. And the first thing I did when I got to DAVIDsTEA was really asking, you know, I knew what my mandate was. It was to build, you know, HR policies and just the team and make sure the HRBP role was created. But in order to do that, I got on the phone with all of the leaders across Canada to make sure that I understood what their needs were, and not go with my gut feeling or what I thought was needed, you know, so that validation the questions, the check-ins, very key.
Yeah, it's key. Communication across all levels. And I think that was probably one of the HR partnerships when I had it with you was probably the best execute in terms of working together and not in a silo. But also, like you said, you would put yourself in, you would always be like, okay, what are you doing? What are you working on? Like, when are you guys meeting? Oh, I could be there, or I could come and like do some store visits. So I think that's really important because that's how you bridge that gap. That's how you understand. And I think more now than ever, this is going to be even more critical, right? With where we've been in the last year to get people back into understand, because things have changed in the last year. What employees want are changing going forwards in the future. It's hard hiring people right now. I know in retail, right? So
yeah, it's hard hiring people. It's hard retaining people. But I think that, everything is feasible with, clear communication and understanding of what the employees want. I think with even with other industries trying to figure out, whether they should, bring their employees back to the office or have them continue working from home, there's a challenge there too, where in my opinion, the best thing to do is really to just ask your employees, talk to them, launch surveys, get input. At the end of the day, they're either going to quit if you force them to come back to the office because that's not what they wanted, and that's a lose-lose situation, or they're going to be super happy and good for you. But why not be prepared and have the information beforehand before you take any of these decisions? So have them participate in your solutions.
So in terms of HR, human resources, why did you choose that as a career, just out of interest? I don't think I ever asked you that. Like,
no. I'm a people person. I love people, and I've always had leadership in me since I was a kid. I was involved in every association you can think about. So for me, it was really important to be able to represent people, and it's easy for me to connect with people. So I think, I've always been driven from a business perspective. I went to business school. I minored in international business. So for me, it was very important to have that marriage between HR, so the people side of the business, and the operations piece. And I speak 5 languages. So for me, I just connect. So, I love cultures. I love getting to know people. And that's it. Empathy, interest in people with a passion for driving business. So that's why I chose HR.
Interesting. I know I met a HR leader a while back, and I put this in the book and I share this all the time, is that she said that, if you're not focused on building culture, you have one. It just probably isn't the one you want.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was one of those things that just stuck in my head. I'm like, oh, that is such a good one-liner, right? Just to remember that, because building culture is something that we all need to be focused on.
Yeah.
All the time, constantly, by the way that we show up and the actions that we take. I know me and Ron had a big conversation about that last week. But in terms of the future, of human resources, I mean, you said what the role of human resources is in HR, in operations, and, maybe other businesses. But what do you envision for the future of human resources for where it's going in terms of supporting businesses, not just the tactical things, but just where would you like it to see? My vision is I want every single employee that works in retail to feel valued.
Yeah.
And for every single manager in retail to be able to access affordable leadership development, quality development that helps them build those skills to be a great leader. So where do you see, HR going, or your impact on HR even?
Yeah, I think that, times are changing. And for example, I launched my own consulting firm, which is called Human First, and I didn't choose that name for nothing. It's because, I believe that putting your employees at the forefront of your operations and really of anything that you're designing for your organization is key. So, building partnerships with the HR professionals that are with you, whether it's on a team that's already present or a consultant, I think is going to be critical. I'd like to see HR professionals stop trying to justify why they're there or the importance that they have. And I think that comes from you, from how you how much you get involved in the business and how much you're there. And I think that with the past year that we've had, HR has played a critical role in determining what to do with employees with the whole COVID situation. I think we were at the forefront of, and hand in hand with operational leaders on what to do with the employees, how to keep them engaged, communication, do we have to proceed with layoffs, restructuring? And so I think more than ever, HR leaders have been really in the forefront and hand in hand with operations. So I'd like to see that continue. I'd like to see, HR sort of participate to the vision of where the organization is going, and always bringing in that perspective of what the employees are looking for. We have a lot of information because we're on conferences, we have a lot of resources, we're very involved, we're very much, we're aware of what the trends are, and we can help, especially in this volatile and complex and uncertain world, bring a lot of clarity from the connections that we have, and we're a big network. So if you as a business leader need information about what your competitor is doing, chances are from our network we'll know what people are doing in other organizations. And so there's a lot of strategic information that we can have access to just by our network and by talking to each other and by exchanging, by the way. So we're doing this, what are you guys doing? And then we get information, and that's sort of how you build information and knowledge too.
That's a really great way of building the partnership better. I'm just sitting here with my operations hat on, right? And I'm thinking, wow, if I actually think of you as not just you in the organization I'm in, but the network of people that you have in human resources and the conferences and all the kind of groups that you're probably more involved in than I am, because I'm probably reading, Retail Insider, Retail Wire, all of those retail networks every day to get that information. Whereas you're tapped into other things, then you may know from this HR leader what you're doing in terms of employee engagement, retention. So kind of if you're an operations leader, you kind of want to have that hat on again, excuse me. And it's about that advisory board or that council, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there are a lot of transferable best practices from other industries that could come into retail too. Especially in retail, you want to remain competitive. Every day, every week counts. And so if you want to remain competitive, you want to think outside the box, you want to know what other industries are doing. Well, sometimes we can draw, inspiration from what other industries are doing and see if that can be applicable to the retail world too. And it's possible, to bring in other things. I think change management should be more present in retail. Proper change management, for example, which is very strong in the manufacturing world, or other talent practices like succession planning, where it's extremely critical, again, in the manufacturing world, because it's technical knowledge that goes away when people retire. Well, why not sort of see what's happening there and bring it over to retail? So
why is it not? In your experience, you've worked into, two pretty significant retailers with big chains. Why is it not so present? What's the challenge?
I think it depends on the level. It depends on the level that you're of positions that we're talking about. So when we're talking about leadership positions, I think it's a lot more present. I think that we accept some of the attrition at the storefront because there's only so much you can do to retain people. So because we accept a certain percentage of attrition, which I think is okay and it's completely normal. It's not necessarily something that we'll do at that level, but I am seeing it more and more applied in leadership positions, where we're taking better. We did it at DAVIDsTEA. We were really focused on making sure that our talent is there. And when I look back, people are there. The ones who got promoted, that makes total sense. And we knew they were going to be promoted, and they are. So I think it's about choosing where it makes sense to do it and putting the efforts there. And then where it doesn't, it's just sort of accepting the attrition or doing everything you can to minimize it, of course, and then letting it be.
And I think a lot of it is just, again, like you said, slow down. I'm going to take that advice that you said at the beginning, slow down to go first, right? If you're leading a district, leading a region, slowing down and having that time. I know that when we did work together on the leadership development of the district managers and the regionals, and we asked them, what do you do with a Monday? Do you remember that? And like, we had like 35 different things that everybody was doing. And some people were like, I spend 2 hours looking at reports. And some people were like, I spend 15 minutes looking at reports. And we were like, why is there such a gap between what this person does and that person does? Because, it might take them longer. They might not see that as the benefit. Some people were like, no, I just take my reports and I go to store and I talk about them in stores. I don't spend 2 hours looking at them. I spend 2 hours talking to people on a phone, or I spend 2 hours assessing where I'm going to move people around. So I think that in itself, that exercise, then we did that, I was like, whoa, like we just saw what everybody's doing differently. But that, again, it's like that's developing that level of leadership so that we know what they're doing with their time, and then their focus becomes succession planning instead of something else. Like I used to be in business and be like, show me your outbox in your Outlook and show me your calendar. And it wasn't because I was micromanaging. I was just like, I just want to know where you're spending your time so I can help you develop people as opposed to doing things you shouldn't be doing, because you can develop people to do them, right? Things like that. So
and it's like you did. It's taking the time to have an impact individually, one-on-one with your employees, which I think has been very difficult for managers in the past year, because there have been a million priorities of things to manage. And so some people have dropped their one-on-ones, some people have dropped their check-ins. So, I think it's really important to keep those going, because more than ever, we're focused on empathy, listening, flexibility. We've just gone through a crazy year, and it's sort of slowing down, hopefully. But, I think it's really, you don't lose anything by listening, but you lose a lot by not keeping that connection there. Because at the end of the day, the employees, yes, they're married into the culture of the organization and they adhere to it and they love it, but they also look for that relationship with their manager, and that the trust, the confidence, and if it's not there, then that's a huge impact on turnover.
So people work for people, right? 100%. So those check-ins do need to come back, and they do need to be important. So it's already half an hour. These conversations go so fast. So we're going to start wrapping up in a minute, but like, is there anything that you didn't share that you'd love to share with our audience just to wrap up? Like maybe there's a question I didn't answer and you're like, oh, I'd love to share that.
Honestly, I would just say, I know it's a tough market in terms of jobs if you're looking for a job, but don't give up, because I've spoken to a lot of people lately who are looking for a job or who need a change. There are too many positions that are open right now with not enough qualified candidates to fill them. So don't give up, and it's important that when you're choosing your next position, that you interview the company just as much as they're interviewing you. If you're making a change, make sure that you're comfortable, make sure that, there's a fit there for you, and make sure that, like I said, it's pivotal for you and that you're gaining something out of it as well for your career, and that's helping you progress. So hang in there. And
stay positive. That's my
stay positive.
Stay positive. And just maintain those relationships, right? Because you just never know where somebody's going to pop up as well. It's like I always say, stay positive, stay connected, because some people are just like, you get these people that just call you when they need something, and you're like, well, like add value and see if you can help me with something too. So like, stay connected and don't give up, because there's always something for everybody, right? Might just not be the right role. So oh, thank you so much. I miss working with you. You were like the best HR leaders, partnerships we'd ever had. And I think it was just so, because of the tactical, practical actions that we kind of shared a little bit. So I hope that all of you, listening to this can actually take away some of those practical, tactical actions that me and Maral actually had in place when we were working together. Because it is really important that we break down those silos, and that human resources and operations can work really closely together. And sometimes they're going to slow us down so that we can go fast. And I always appreciate that. I see that as a positive thing, not as a negative thing, because it just, when you're in the heat of the emotion, you're trying to deal with people. We can all make decisions that later on, like you said, can have a ripple effect. So super important.
Well, the feeling was mutual. I loved working with you too. Who knows?
Who knows?
And thanks for having me. It's always wonderful discussing with you.
All right. So if you see this in your feed, I'm going to say it again, share it. Share it when you see this come up so that as many people as can get access to this. And we just thank you very much for joining us every week. And that wraps up another weekly broadcast. So we'll see you next week. Bye, Maral. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.